Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Radhe Jaya Radhe Jaya Radhe Jaya Radhe Jaya Shri Radhe O Jaya Vrishabhanu Nandini Radhe Radhe Vrishabhanu Nandini Radhe Radhe O Radhe 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 Jai Shri Shri Guru Garanga Ganhava Giri Hari Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai Radha Gopinath Ju Ki Jai Satchinandana Gaur Hari Ki Jai Srila Gurudev Ki Jai Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Venu Guru Varga Ki Jai Ananta Gota Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol Om Bhagina Timirandasya Gyananjala Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarabhaktaya Namo Namaha Yam Pravajantamanapethyam Apeti Krityam Dvaipaino Viraha Kataraju Hava Putreti Tammayatayo Taravavirusam Sarvabhutam Nimanatoshmi. I first of all offer millions of Dandavat pranams unto the lotus feet of my most beloved Gurudev, Nitya Lila Pravishna Om Asto Tarasara Shishimad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And the same again millions of times unto the lotus feet of our beloved Nitya Lila Pravishna Om Asto Tarasara Shishimad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada and all the Vaishnavi devotees of the Lord, Dandavat pranams. So, this morning we began this great epic Srimad Bhagavatam, and we described something of an introduction, trying to get a picture of its continuity, etc., and the personalities involved in the narration of it within the Bhagavatam. In the first verse of the Bhagavatam, it's at the end of the first verse, it's talking about Satyam Paramaho Dimahi, that who is that most worshipable personality that is about to be described. And there are different understandings of who is that personality. The Acharyas have gone through and, for example, explained that Lord Narayan or Vishnu is that supreme Satyam Paramo. I may also explain that like Dwarkadish or Mathuresh Krishna. And then they've explained that Brajendranandan Sri Krishna in Vrindavan. And then more than that, Sri Radha. And more than that, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Radha and Krishna combined. So, in all of our discussion and trying to explain these topics or describe these topics, we're conscious very deeply of the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Only by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can we understand, especially these topics we're going to be discussing in the evening time of the 10th Canto. Without the mercy of Mahaprabhu, we cannot understand this very clearly, really at all. Prior to Mahaprabhu, the understanding within, for example, South India was still very much Aishwarya, and their appreciation for Radha was at most that Krishna was married to Radha. Gurudev gave his great lecture one time in Uchagaon. I think it was 99 or 2000, when he was declared the Yuga Acharya, because so many Babajis had come to listen to Gurudev, and Gurudev very beautifully explained that Radha and Krishna actually were not married. And they didn't know, they had no idea, because they did not know the glories of Mahaprabhu. If you don't know Mahaprabhu, like many people in Braj, actually, if you walk around in the households, they have Radha and Krishna. Many households, they don't still today fully appreciate who is Mahaprabhu. You cannot enter into an appreciation of what is the nature of Parakiya Bhav without Mahaprabhu's mercy. So, Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati, he gives a very beautiful gradation of the Bhagavatam. He gives it in 8 stages. There are the 10 stages that we'll discuss in the morning times, Sargo, Vishargo, Stanam, Poshana, Uttaya, etc. But now, Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati, he gave us one lecture called The Palace of Rasa. And there he describes that the first 4 stages of the Bhagavatam are like the clearing stages. And the first stage he calls Samshaya, which means doubtfulness. So that doubtfulness in the sadhak is purified by the Bhagavatam. And then the next stage he addresses is Nashtika, or atheistic mentality. Even after your doubts have been purified, you might still have somewhat of an atheistic tendency if we haven't actually fully accepted that Supreme Lord in our hearts fully. So he clears that atheistic thing. And then the next stage he describes is called Nirgun. And in that Nirgun, of course, that means without qualities. That means like an impersonal understanding or appreciation. So this is also cleared by the Bhagavatam. And then the 4th stage is called Kliva, which means neuter, which means not male or female. It's become like a personality, but that personality can be male or female. There's no defined gender. So this is how he grades it. And then the next stage, he describes the Purush, the potent Lord himself, that Supreme Lord. That's the 5th stage. Huh? Sorry? You can't hear me? I turned it down. Hare Krishna. Can you hear me now better? Okay. Tell me again if it's not loud enough. If I hold the mic too close, it scratches, so I have to. So, Shamshaya, doubt, and then Nashtika.
Number 5.
Yeah, I'm just going through them. Shamshaya, doubt, Nashtika, 2nd, then Nirgun, then Kliva. Now Purush is the 5th stage. Now after the Purush stage, then he's talking about Mituna, a stage of Mituna. This is when there's a potent and potency. And this is when there is even a relationship between the potent and potency within Krishna. This is like Lord Ramchandra, etc. And then the next stage he describes is called Swakiya. And the final stage is Parakiya. These are the stages that he has given in the Bhagavatam. So also we can pull these out of the Bhagavatam and see these stages very beautifully as well. But I'm saying this tonight because the understanding of Parakiya is the final conclusion, that unwedded love. Now, how can we understand this unwedded love? We have to address this point before I go into this Venu Gita. Now, at the end of the Rasa Panchadiya, those 5 chapters in the Bhagavatam, I think it's 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. These 5 chapters, they are describing the most intimate of Sri Krishna's sweet pastimes. The crest jewel of all his pastimes is the Rasa Lila. We must not ignore under any circumstances or minimize that Rasa Lila. So at the very end of that Rasalita section, Parikshit Maharaj, he asks Shukadev Goswami a very beautiful question. He says, how you're explaining how the Supreme Lord had pastimes with other men's wives. How can I understand this from a dharmic point of view? The people who have access to the Srimad Bhagavatam are of a dharmic nature. They are honest, sincere personalities wanting Sri Krishna into their lives. They're wanting freedom from this material bondage. So they're taking with sincerity the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then they're reading in the 10th canto that this Supreme Lord, who's been described in the other cantos as such a great Purush, now all of a sudden I'm hearing that actually he's having relationships with other men's wives. How can I understand this? So now Shukadev Goswami, he answers. I'm just going to answer verbatim what he says, and then there are many, 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 of course, commentaries on this point. But what Shukadev Goswami says, he says, first of all, that Krishna is like a great blazing fire. A fire can consume anything and remain and retain its purity. Right? You can throw any sort of rubbish, a dead body, on a fire, and it will consume that body and maintain its purity. Similarly, Krishna is like that. He can perform any sort of activity and remain fully pure. So this is the first consideration that Sukadeva Goswami gives. He also says immediately that these pastimes should never ever be imitated. Just like Lord Shiva could drink that poison from the ocean when it was churned and hold it in his throat, become Nilakanta. So he was empowered to do that. There's also another beautiful example that I like of Sankaracharya. Sankaracharya is Lord Shiva. And one day he was walking with his disciples, and one Sudra lady came and offered him a sweet. And Sankaracharya, he saw that sweet, and he, in his mind, he offered that, and he straight away took it. And the other sannyasis that were with him, they were thinking, oh, so you can just take any foodstuffs offered by anyone. Oh, this is okay. And then they were all making their calculations for, how they would get so many extra foodstuffs in their bag. And Sankaracharya could understand their mentality. So as they were walking through the village, they came to a arrowsmith's forge, and he was melting lead to make the arrows, and he had a little cup he was melting on the fire. And Sankaracharya was with his sannyasis, so he just reached over to that cup, and he took the cup from the blacksmith and just drank it straight like that. And then he offered it to the sannyasis around. Anyone want some of this? And then he was showing what? He took the cup of molten lead, metal, that was melting to make the arrowheads. It was in a cup he was holding with a pair of plier-like things. And he was holding over the fire, and Sankaracharya just took that and drank it. And then he offered it to the other sannyasis, knowing their mentality. So like this, beware of these topics in an understanding of their greatly elevated position. In the spiritual world, this world is a reflection of the spiritual world. It's a perverted reflection. These pastimes of having affairs with other men's wives in this world is most abominable. It's the lowest thing that can take place. And it's the opposite in the spiritual world. This is the perverted reflection of that spiritual reality. Everything here in this world is upside down. Everything is different. It's like if you look at yourself in a mirror, it looks like it's the same initially, but then you examine more closely, and actually the right side is on the left side, and the left side is on the right side. It's all round the other way. That's how it is when you look in a mirror. It's round the other way. So similarly, this material world is completely a perverted reflection, because our focus of attention is not on that Supreme Lord, it's on ourselves. This is the nature of this world. Everything revolves around me, I, and mine. Everything in this world. This is what our meditation has been from birth. How will I progress? How will I live? How will I do this? And we're bringing something of Krishna into it. But principally, this is called conditioned life. But in the spiritual world, there's no thought of myself in the same way. Of course, the understanding of my nature is there, but not in the same self-centered way. So this is the nature of the spiritual world. And Shukadeva Goswami is also saying that we must take with faith that the Lord's statements are always true. We must accept whatever the Lord does with his pastimes as being absolutely perfect. This is the faithful sadhak. He's not questioning Krishna's pastimes or his activities or actions. And another very important point, when we really closely examine Krishna's affairs with the gopis, they're totally of a selfless nature. The gopis are selfless and Krishna is selfless. Both are inspiring each other to greater degrees of intimacy and their relationship. This is actually what they're doing. They're both totally selfless. They're not one is trying. If it had been calm or lust, material lust, then it would have been, we would have seen, we would have understood that. But it's completely not on that level at all. Also, Shukadeva Goswami is describing that Krishna, he lives in the hearts of all, particularly his greatest devotees, the gopis of Vrindavan, the Rajaramanis. So these are actually his eternal consorts, they're his eternal wives. And he's performing this parakiya pastime to create a much more dramatic and much more exciting situation for this pastime to reach its highest pitch in transcendence. This is why he's doing this. He didn't arrange for a parakiya situation himself. Yogamaya did. Yogamaya is a manifestation from Sri Radha herself. So Sri Radha, knowing the intricacies of amorous play, understands that actually this parakiya is going to create the highest, sweetest taste. So Yogamaya arranges it. We all know the story at Pilipukan, when Mother Yashoda put the yellow turmeric on Radharani's hands, and then Radharani was going to be married to Krishna, and Punamasi said, actually, yes, it's a wonderful match. And then in the final house, when they were doing the astrology, she said, actually, if these two marry, one of them must die. So basically, Punamasi, she herself stopped that marriage. So we can see that this is a much more satisfying relationship for Krishna. In a swakiya, what does swa mean? Swa means own. Swakiya. When you marry, you look at your husband and you say, now you are mine forever. And the husband looks at the wife and says, now you are mine forever. There's some boundary there. There's some containment there. It's not boundless like parakiya. Parakiya is without those boundaries. The gopis don't feel that they can chastise Krishna because he didn't do something like that. They do chastise Krishna for anything they can think of, but not in the same way that a wife would chastise him, as if they are their property, even though they're thinking that he's their property. But it's all in the affectionate, intimate state of consciousness. It's nothing to do with anything whatsoever material. And also, Shukadeva Goswami is describing that these human-like pastimes of Krishna are very, very attractive. They attract the conditioned jivas. If we hear about these sweet pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan, we become attracted to taking up this process of becoming freed from this material conception. How else will we become liberated, freed from this? If we're just thinking, oh, I want to become freed from this material suffering, it's like banging your head against a wall and then you suddenly stop and say, well, now I'm happy because I'm not banging my head anymore. So that's what a liberated condition is actually like. You're not suffering anymore. But that's not the juice, that's not the sweetness, that's not the rasa, that's not the heart where the sadhak is aspiring for. He's aspiring for this intimate, very sweet relationship. So now, in coming into this subject matter of the Venu Gita, this Venu Gita is when the gopis are sitting in their homes and they're remembering Sri Krishna and his beauty and the sweet sound of his Venu. And they're describing amongst themselves through 20 verses. There's 20 verses only in the Venu Gita. And it's describing the how that Venu affects the other living entities, and they are seeing that in a mood of practically like jealousy, because they can't be with Krishna in the cowherd pasturing grounds. Now these moods, it's described by our acharyas, are called purvarag, because they're in separation from Krishna. There's 4 types of separation. We must hear about this many, many times to understand it, because from the material standpoint, separation seems like a negative thing. But spiritually, this separation is not. This separation is what nourishes prema. It nourishes the union. Without the separation, the prema is going to become minimized. The vipralamba that will nourish the prema. So 4 types of vipralamba or separation. There is purvarag first, and then there is man. This is described also as a type of separation, when Sri Radha feels that to increase the affection of her lover, that she will ignore her lover. So we see this same symptom within the material world also. But in the spiritual world, it's very, very pure. And Krishna becomes totally submissive to Sri Radha. One of the highest type of heroine, there are 8 types of heroine. The highest heroine is called Swadhina Bhartika. This Swadhina Bhartika is when the lover controls her beloved. She feels completely in control. And actually there's a perverted reflection in this world. Some of us may know, if you've been in married life, whatever, that actually the woman is very satisfied when she's controlling her husband. This is in one way or another. And we can see this bhav. It's actually coming from Radha originally. But this mood of Swadhina Bhartika is accomplished through this separation mood of man. Only Sri Radha can go into man in such an extreme way. Why? Because she knows conclusively the degree of Krishna's love for her. She knows emphatically that Krishna can never leave her. Chandravali cannot go into man in the same way, because she's not quite sure Krishna will come and pacify her. And she'll just be sulky for weeks, and maybe Krishna won't even come. So she can't do that. But Sri Radha knows the degree and extent of Krishna's love for her, so she can go into man for 1 or 2 days even. Sometimes even a little longer. She can go into that mode. So this is a type of separation. And then another type of separation is prem vaichitya. This is a very specialized type. This is separation in meeting, in union. We all know the story of Prem Sarovar. We just went there a couple of weeks ago. How beautiful was that Sarovar? And to hear that pastime of Madhu Mangal chasing the bumblebee away that was bothering Sri Radha, and then coming back, returning and saying, Madhusudan has gone forever. And then Sri Radha, hearing this, immediately thought her Madhu had actually gone forever, and went into such a high state of prema that the gopis and Krishna himself had never witnessed this high state of meeting of separation in meeting. And it was at this stage that Krishna decided that he would leave Radha. Because in that state of separation, the Acharyas describe, there is actually intense meeting. There is internally intense union within that separation. This is the point, it's not material. And then the fourth sort of vipralamba is called purvas. And this is when Krishna goes to another purvas. Huh? Huh? Pravas. Sorry, pravas. So this stage is when the lovers are separated for a long period of time. Now, each of these separation moods has a corresponding union description. In Purvarag, it's called Sankshipta. And that meeting after Purvarag, understand what is Purvarag. Purvarag is like now in Venu Gita, when the gopis' hearts have become so eager to be with Krishna that they're actually seeing a sporti of Krishna in front of them. Practically speaking, they are with Krishna. They're not with Krishna, but they are with Krishna internally, completely, because of the intensity of that anticipation of meeting, that Purvarag. This first Purvarag is described very beautifully in Ananda Vrindavan Champu. And Srila Kavi Kanpur, he explains very beautifully how the gopis, when they develop this first feeling of attraction for Krishna, they're just originally playing in the dust together like children, Krishna and the gopis. And then one day, all of a sudden, it seems that they're suddenly aware that Krishna is such a beautiful looking person. And suddenly they become like shy of him. Previously they've just been like children running around. Then all of a sudden this shyness and bashfulness starts to come in their hearts towards Krishna. This shyness, understand, it's a veneer that covers this raging fire of attraction burning in their hearts. They show this extreme shyness, and it's like a protection for them externally. But actually inside is this raging fire. Now it's described in this Venu Gita that when the flute sound comes through, this flute sound is so shattering that this veneer of shyness and bashfulness starts to dissolve in the gopis. Because initially they're sitting talking together, they're glorifying Krishna and Baladeva. But then gradually, throughout these 20 verses, it becomes more and more intimate and more intense in their exchanges, because this veneer of shyness and bashfulness has been totally melted away, and this fire of intimacy has started to glow amongst them all, and they're talking much more openly about their attraction to Krishna and their desire for union with Krishna. So these are the this is a way that the Acharyas have described. There is rasa tattva, and there is the lila itself. When we study the rasa tattva, it's very calming and peaceful for the mind, because it gives a very clear picture. It's almost like the psychology of the loving exchanges between Radha and Krishna. It's not just entirely esoteric, but there's more sort of support there for the sadhak to appreciate what's actually happening. So Rupa Goswami, he explains so much. He's the Rasa Acharya, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they're explaining so much of these specialities within their relationships. As the devotees become more and more purified of their material desires, then these topics become more and more interesting. And there is so much in these topics to actually examine. If you just read the third part of Jivadharma, the last part of Jivadharma, it's all so beautifully explained in there, all these different aspects of these intimate relationships and the very specialities of them and how they actually are balanced together. What is rasabas, for example? And how is that not acceptable? So many aspects are there. So what I would like to do this evening is just explain a little bit of Venu Gita, and then also I would like to go through with you just briefly Gurudev's introduction to Venu Gita. If we don't reach the topic of Venu Gita, we can do it tomorrow. But this introduction to Venu Gita, I think, is Srila Gurudev's one of his greatest masterpieces, because it explains to us why we must hear these topics. It's imperative that we hear these topics. There is so much written by Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati and other acharyas to be cautious in entering into these subject matters. But the heart of our practice is deep within these subject matters. We must absolutely be totally assured that this Raganuga, this Rag Marg, is our property. 100 million%. It's not something that we can shelve and think, oh, I must become more purified and then I will actually very carefully enter into these topics. This is not at all what Gurudev's message is, loud and clear in this introduction. So if you can be patient, maybe I'm sure many of you have already gone through it, but there are so many specialities within here. Many schools of devotees, Vaishnavas, have this conception. But all of us sitting here have been exposed for perhaps many years to the teachings of our beloved Srila Gurudev, who was in such an elevated condition himself that he had the potency to actually give us such a deep impression of these very special sacred topics and an instruction to keep this flow of Raganuga alive. This is the only thought that his disciples should have at this point. We should try so diligently to understand what is Raganuga Bhakti and speak about it at any opportunity in a proper manner. There's no need for esoteric descriptions, etc. That doesn't mean what is Raganuga Bhakti. You can discuss what is Rasa Vichar, etc. You can discuss the teachings directly of Srila Rupa Goswami. You can discuss so many aspects, and then you can discuss something of the Leela. But without the Leela, we're going to die. We're simply just going to shrivel up. We're going to have no juice. Many times I've heard comments from other groups of devotees that it seems that in Gurudev Sangha there's so much juice flowing. It's true. There is. Because we've been given that opportunity to drink that special beverage of Leela. Without Leela, the tattva makes no sense. Like we discussed a little bit this morning, it just becomes like gyan. We must approach Leela. Leela is like the rider. Tattva is like the horse. What is the purpose of the horse with the saddle? It's to give, a place for the rider to sit. The rider is the Leela. So we must enter into Leela. But the more we enter into Leela, we should also balance it with understanding the nature of that Leela very clearly through the Rasa Tattva descriptions, and try and understand that carefully and clearly. And most of that is described beautifully in Jayavadana. So Gurudev is describing like this. He's saying topics of Venu Gita, Sri Rasa Panchadeya, Yugal Gita, Brahmara Gita, and so on, as described in the 10th Canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. This consideration is fully legitimate, but according to their conception, only a sadhak who has conquered the 6 urges, Kam, Krodha, etc., who is free from all anarthas and fully purified from the heart disease of lust, is eligible to hear such topics, while all others have no right. Now we will examine this topic in greater detail. So, he first of all quotes from Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila chapter 4. He's saying the esoteric and confidential conclusions regarding the amorous pastimes of Rasaraj Sri Krishna together with the gopis, who are the embodiments of Mahabhav, are not fit to be disclosed to the common ordinary man. But without revealing them, no one can enter into this topic.
I shall therefore describe these topics in a concealed manner so that only Rasik Bhaktas will be able to understand, whereas ineligible fools will not. Anyone who has established Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu in their hearts will attain transcendental bliss by hearing all these conclusions without the focus on Gora Tattva. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the embodiment of Madanakya Mahabhav, and he, through the life of a sadhak, is giving to us, he's our Bhajan Shiksha Guru. He's giving to us through his teachings, through his actions in every single way, how to enter these topics. He lived his life in the most exemplary way. Quietly in the Gambhira in Puri, when all the devotees would come for Rath Yatra, he would contain his moods and perform those ceremonies, but they would come out, even though he was trying to contain them. But his most intense moods were when he was in a solitary place with Swarup Damodar and Rai Ramananda and Gadadhar Pandit. These were his most intense experiences that are described by Raghunath Das and Swarup Damodar in their Kadachas. This entire doctrine is as sweet as newly grown mango sprouts, which can be relished only by the devotees who are likened to cuckoo birds. For the camel-like non-devotees, there is no possibility of admittance into these topics. Therefore, there is special jubilation in my heart. If those whom I fear are themselves unable to comprehend these topics, then what could be of greater source of happiness in all the three worlds? So he's happy that they can't understand these topics, therefore he can write about them. Therefore, after offering obeisances to the devotees, I am revealing this subject without any hesitation. Now, at the end of this Rasa Panchadiya section in the Bhagavatam, there's this beautiful verse, Vikriti tam brajavadubi tam cha Vishnu, Shradanvito nushrunyad arta varenyamya, Bhaktim param bhagavati pratilabhya karamam hridrogamasava pinoti acharena dira. This verse, the way it is presented, totally refutes this idea that first we must become purified. It's saying, Vikriditam braja vedubi itam cha Vishnu. It's saying that first you hear the sweet topics, Vikridi, these playful topics of Radha and Krishna. First you hear these topics. Not only hear them, but you also speak them. Varenyad, it's saying. You should speak them, and then you can remember these topics. If you're not ever speaking these topics, then how will you possibly be able to remember these topics? In our confidential personal relationships, we're always praying for one or two personalities that we can have a relationship with, whereby we can share these topics with. It's not that we have to have 50 or 60 people to share these topics with necessarily, but in our own lives, if we have one person who we can intimately share our inner realizations on these topics, that's sufficient. Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he said, you only need 2 or 3 persons to associate with actually on the path of Raganuga Bhakti. It's not that you need a whole temple filled with people having exchanges. But now I'm just trying to make these definitions, but in our personal exchanges, we can be speaking these topics. So it's saying Varenyan, Shradanvito Nushrunyad Arta Varenyan, that describe these topics, and then Smaranam will come. So our process, the 9 angas of bhakti, is Shravanam, hearing, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, remembering. So in this verse, in the first 2 lines, it's saying the same thing. First you hear, then you have kirtan, then you speak the topics, and then you will remember. This is the process. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam. So this is described in this verse. And then it's saying, when you do like this, then Bhaktim Param Bhagavati Labhya, then pure bhakti will rise in the heart. This is the process. That first we hear, and then we repeat, we speak, and then we have smaranam, we remember, we have remembrance of these topics, and then pure bhakti will, and then after pure bhakti arises like a blazing fire of purity, then what will happen? This hridroga, this disease of the heart, karam hridroga, this will be burnt to ashes. This disease of the heart will go. This lust will go. This is the way that Shukadeva Goswami has described the process very clearly. It's the very last verse of the Rasa Panchadya. The last verse he's saying this. In other words, how to access this, how to actually attain this remembrance of sweetness of Radha and Krishna's pastimes. This is when pure bhakti will come, and that disease of the heart will go. Gurudev once described, how can you take the air out of a pot? If I give you a clay pot, how will you take the air out of it? How will we do it? We put something in, and then automatically the air goes out. We put liquid into the pot, then automatically the air goes out. Similarly, if we want to get the lust out of the heart, we put something in. That something are the sweet pastimes of Radha and Krishna. Then automatically this hridroga, this calm, this disease of the heart will go. You know, our beloved Srila Prabhupada, one time in Boston in 1973 or 74, I was told this by the president of Boston previously, and there was something like 65 men living in 2 houses, brahmacharis, and there were 3 brahmacharinis. And springtime came around, and all the butterflies were in the atmosphere. And the women became very fearful. They felt threatened by so many men around. So the president, he wrote to Srila Prabhupada and said, what should we do in this situation? Prabhupada wrote straight back and said, you all gather in the temple and you read the Rasa Leela pastimes from my Krishna storybook. This is the antidote for this disease. Have faith and understand it, because it's so pure, it's so sacred. This beautiful verse, Na paryeham niravadya samyujam. This niravadya samyujam. What does that mean? It means so sacred. This love that the gopis hold for Krishna is so sacred. When the consciousness comes into this realm of appreciating the sacredness of that affection that the gopis hold, that selfless affection that they hold towards Krishna, then any other lower material thought immediately is eradicated by appreciating that brilliant purity of their love and attraction to Radha, to Krishna. Radha's love for Krishna. So this is the process. And many in our lives in the future will not agree. So it's our duty bound to understand how Srila Gurudev presented these topics. I remember initially in the 90s, early and mid-90s, Srila Gurudev would speak quite regularly on these kind of topics. But then as he began traveling more and more in the Western world in the 2000 and later on, then he was not speaking so openly on these topics. But he'd already said it, so it was like the cat was out of the bag. And we were already like looking for that. But he was presenting things in a very, very pucker way. I remember so many festivals Gurudev would just go through the 10th Canto. He would go make us all speak on different pastimes, story to story to story, just go through, just to become associated and familiar with the beautiful childhood pastimes of Krishna, from Putana, Trinavrata, etc., all these pastimes. And then he would very often say at the beginning of a week-long festival, and then we will speak about Rasa Leela, but he'd never get there. He regularly would sort of plan it so that he'd just get before there and then say, well, it's just now coming. And then we'd sort of have to wait. But his intention was to make a very deep, firm sanskar that this is the prayojan. This is our path. This is Raganuga Bhakti. This is the gift of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, Gurudev quotes another very beautiful verse here. Anugrahaya bhaktanam manusyam deha ashtitta bhajate tadrishi krida yashrutva tatparo bhavet. And this is saying that in order to bestow mercy upon the devotees as well as the conditioned souls, Bhagavan manifests his human-like form and performs such extraordinary pastimes as the Rasa Lila, that anyone who hears them becomes exclusively devoted unto him. So, this is the reason why Krishna is performing these pastimes, to show us his unique, splendid attraction. Krishna, Gurudev is saying, he manifests all these pastimes for the benefit of the devotees. By so doing, even ordinary persons, other than devotees, who hear them, become attracted to the Lord. And I just want to come quickly to one particular paragraph. There's one paragraph here, and it's saying 3 times in the paragraph that if you don't hear these pastimes, it is indicative that you're of an atheistic nature. So this word, it's described grammatically, bhavet. That is at the end of this verse, anugrahaya bhaktanam. It says paro bhavet at the end. This is described as an imperative. It's not just saying, maybe do this. It's saying you have to do this. This is the path by the acharyas. This is imperative. If you have understood that this rag marg is the topmost path for us, then we must hear regularly, under guidance. I feel I'm always under Srila Gurudev's guidance, having heard so many years from him. So let me just read this paragraph quickly. The word dira, now he's talking about in the verse Vikriditam Rajavadubiyatam Traditional, means pandit, or one who is learned in the Shastra, one who refuses to accept the claim of this verse and thinks, as long as the disease of lust remains in the heart, prema cannot be obtained. You understand? If someone is thinking that because of my lusty lower nature, then prema cannot be achieved, then Gurudev is saying is said to possess an atheistic temperament. What sort of faith have we developed through our study and practice? We've only together had one class on the Bhagavatam, but we're going to go through all the different cantos, the 9 cantos. The 9 cantos create sambandha for the palace of rasa to have a firm foundation on. But I'm just jumping ahead and assuming that most of you have already read so much of that, and I want to parallel the morning and evening. If I just stay in the 9 cantos for like 10 classes, I'm going to feel it's not focused on what is the prayojan, what is the heart. So that's why in the evenings I want to bring in this topic. And today I'm not really going into the topic, I'm just touching the outside of it. And tomorrow perhaps I can describe more of the actual depth of the topic. But I want to just make this foundation very clear, because we have to regularly present this in different audiences to different people. This is our duty now. Srila Gurudev has given us this key. He's given us this understanding of what is the prayojan, what is the ultimate goal of life. The ultimate goal of life is to have so much attraction for Sri Radha and her seva. And to have that Radha Dasyam, I must understand fully what is that nature of Radha Dasyam. How can I understand that if I don't know what it is? So I must hear about these topics. He's saying it's an atheistic temperament. One who is free from such a foolish atheistic demur is known as a pandit, a sober person, dhira. Consequently, only those who have firm faith in the Shastra are known as dhira. Those who have no faith in the statements of the Shastras are atheistic and offenders to the holy name. Such persons can never attain prema. So, sorry. Okay. I'll turn the mic up. Hare Krishna. Okay? Too loud. Is that right? Keep it up, okay.
The kirtan.
Oh, the kirtan, right, okay. Okay, so please take this beautiful introduction in Venu Gita to heart and try to take notes on it and learn it. Learn how to present these topics so that you can speak Leela fluently. Because without this clear understanding, then how can we enter into the Leela? So now, coming to the Leela, the previous chapter to Venu Gita is a glorification of the autumn season in Vrindavan. And Shukadeva Goswami, he carries that through in the first verse, describing the sweetness and beauty of this autumn season. There are 6 seasons in Vrindavan, and the autumn season is considered one of the most beautiful. It's when all the ponds and lakes are filled with clear water. It's when the Jamuna is flowing very clearly and beautifully. It's had its flood during the monsoon period, and now it's completely clear and clean. And all the lakes and kunds are also clear and clean. And how the seasonal flowers and fruits are also blossoming at this time. Many fruits are maturing at this time in the autumn season. So there's a beautiful description here. It creates a very nice, sweet atmosphere. And amongst that atmosphere, the gopis, they hear the sound of Krishna's Venu. This Venu, it has the audacity to go anywhere at all. It can go where men are not supposed to go. In the traditional Vedic houses, the women would stay in the inner quarters and the men would stay in the outer quarters. But this flute can travel anywhere it likes. That's why Krishna, he made himself so expert on the flute so that he could just be completely unbounded in his wanting to touch all the different hearts of all the living entities of Braj, but particularly the gopis of Braj. So the gopis, they begin to describe Krishna's qualities, and they very carefully are describing Krishna's qualities. They're not excessive in it, because they're holding this shyness. This flute sound, as I described before, it hasn't yet melted this shyness. It hasn't yet melted the veneer that is protecting their very tender-like barbs. Gradually, through the dialogue that the gopis have with one another, this veneer is melted more and more. And this gives great intimate vision to us of who are these personalities and what is their relationship with Sri Krishna. What is this world of love? We know in this material world that everyone is looking to be loved or how to love something. But this is the... everyone is failing in this area. But then we hear these pastimes of these gopis and how much sweetness they are experiencing in their affectionate feelings and moods towards Sri Krishna. So Gurudev describes that these concealing of barbs are called avihita. This avihita, it arises, it conceals, and this is a sanchari barb that comes in the form of deceit or shyness or fearfulness even. So these Sanchari Bhavs, there's 33 Sanchari Bhavs, and they're acting on the lake of the Sthai Bhav. The Sthai Bhav is what has been influenced by the sound of Krishna's flute. The Sthai Bhav of the gopis, of course, is Madhurya, Shringara Ras. And then these other Sanchari, Vyabhachari Bhavs are coming onto this lake. And the result of that coming onto the lake of the Sthai Bhav, then many waves are starting to be produced. And those waves come in the form of Anubhavs. Anubhavs are when there is still some intelligence left, but one is unrestrictedly singing or rolling on the ground, etc. These are Anubhavs. There are 14, I think, Anubhavs, correct? Or 13? Can't quite remember. Titha? Huh? Less. 11. 11, okay. I'll tell you tomorrow. So, there's a few Anubhavs. And there's 8 Sattvika Bhavs, which are even deeper, which are beyond any sort of intelligence at all. They're just involuntary, they just manifest out. So, but it's talking here about these various Sanchari Bhavs that are affecting the gopis. And then there's this beautiful, most famous verse that Gurudev quotes so regularly. This Vaharpida Natavaram Varavapu Karneo Karnikaram Bibrad Vasha Kanaka Kapisham Vajayantim Chamalam Randram Venu Adara Shudaya Purayan Gopi Vrindai Vrindaranyam Swabada Ramanam Pravisha Gita Kirtita. That the gopis see through their eyes tinged with prem. Doesn't make it this translation. When the Braja Kishoris heard that sound, just get the right verse. No, this is verse 5, I'm sorry, not verse 3. So the translation for this is, accompanied by the cowherd boyfriends, Shyamasundara enters the forest of Vrindadevi. His head was decorated with a peacock feather. He wore yellow karnikara flowers over his ears, a dazzling golden yellow garment on his body, and around his neck, extending down to his knees, hung a fragrant Vaijayanti garland made of 5 kinds of flowers. Splendidly attired as a beautiful Natavara, a most expert dancer, he appeared just like a very fine actor on stage. He poured the nectar of his lips through the holes of his flute, and the cowherd boys followed behind him, singing his glories. In this way, the land of Vrindavan was even more charming than Vaikuntha, due to being beautified by Sri Krishna's lotus feet, marked with the conch, disc, and other symbols. So Gurudev has described that this describes Krishna's roop. In the whole of the Bhagavatam, there's no more beautiful description than this of Krishna's form, his beautiful mood of this Natavara. It's described that every part of his self is dancing. His earrings are dancing against his cheeks. His curls around his head coming out of his turban are dancing on his forehead. His pitamba across his shoulder is dancing on his shoulders. His feet are dancing as he walks. Every part of himself. And the effect of this is that all the personalities around him, all the cowherd boys, they're also dancing along with Krishna. Not only the cowherd boys, but even the cows themselves, they start to also dance. And even Jamuna Devi, those inert entities, with their waves, they are also dancing in time. The whole of Braj is dancing in time to this sweetness of Krishna's flute. This is the amazing quality of Krishna as he walks in Vrindavan, playing his flute. And this is what the gopis are seeing. This is what they're hearing. This is what they're experiencing. And their hearts, in this mood of purvarag, in such a tender state, are becoming completely intoxicated with prema towards Sri Krishna, even though he's not present there. But this separated mood, and at that time they begin to see a spurti of Krishna in their meditation as they're speaking with each other. And it's described that at this time, then their shyness amongst each other begins to disintegrate, and then they glow in their company together, and then they start exchanging more and more of these beautiful verses. So tomorrow we'll explain some more of those verses and discuss something more of this Rasa Tattva in connection with this Leela that I'm trying to describe a little bit of. But understand the heart of this subject matter is that without hearing about these pastimes of the most beautiful personality, Sri Krishna, and his intimate relationship with Sri Radha, what sort of bhajan are we going to be performing? We won't have any bhajan. So we must keep that in our focus. That is our goal, to recognize fully what is the heart of the subject matter. Okay, I'll stop there. We're going to have the arti at 6:30 here. So this seems like a very short class, but I've just tried to describe from the introduction this evening, and I've discussed what Srila Parikshit Maharaj's objections were to Krishna at the beginning. I've tried to put this Leela on a footing that is acceptable in a public forum. That's what I've attempted to do.
Tomorrow you will do again, then
Say?
tomorrow you will do this book again, right?
Yeah.
So we all have a book. And if everybody has to read it, we could bring it and sing it together.
Yes.
Recite all the verses.
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
She's asking that we all have this book, Venu Gita. So tomorrow you can all bring this book and we can recite some of these verses together, and we can discuss these sweet pastimes of Krishna. So there are 5 Gits within the 10th Canto. These are very sacred places of the Bhagavatam. So we must be very familiar on where this current of the Bhagavatam is leading us. If you know where you're going, then you're halfway there. Right? So, Jai. Does anyone have any question at all this evening?
Yes. It's about the verse, Srimad Bhagavatam, first verse. It starts Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Yeah.
Right? And ends Param Satyam Dhimahi.
Yeah.
So it's indicated in the beginning that it's Vasudeva Krishna.
Yes.
How do the Acharyas see it's going deeper?
He's asking that in the very beginning of the Bhagavatam, it's quoting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And then it's saying at the end of the first verse, this Satyam Parama Dhimahi, that it's saying who is that supreme person. And he's asking,
So it's indicating it's Vasudeva Krishna.
right from the very beginning,
Yes.
there's no question that the absolute reality is Sri Krishna.
Yes.
From the very beginning. But what nature and what aspect of Sri Krishna? So there are many aspects of Sri Krishna in Aishwarya, etc., all the way through the different incarnations, Krishna the Supreme Controller. So that is all being described through. But then in the 10th Canto, which is the subject matter that directly Narad told Vyasadeva to describe, the sweet pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan with Mother Yashoda. When Krishna doesn't know that he's Krishna, when Krishna is in full Madhurya mood, this is the sweetness of that Leela. Okay, something. Sorry? Can't hear you, have to say. Spurti. Spurti. It means when you're seeing Krishna in your heart. It's not an hallucination. It's much deeper than that. It's like It's a reality, but it's not a reality at the same time. Would you describe it like that? Huh? Momentary. It's a momentary reality, a momentary vision of the Lord. Yeah.
You were talking about
Reverse.
those stages may last for a long time, or they short.
It depends. Like Purva Rag, for example, can be the first Purva Rag is quite some time. It's described in Ananda Vrindavan Champu that the gopis for many, many weeks they had never embraced Krishna. They had never expressed their actual amorous mood towards Krishna ever. And this intensity was building and building and building. Practically they were ready to give up their lives totally. And at that point, Krishna played his flute and called them to the forest. Prior to that, that had all been Purva Rag for many days and even weeks. This Purva Rag, actually this Purva Rag was first broken when the Kalyanaga was defeated by Krishna. This is when Krishna first acknowledged the affection of the gopis. When he was dancing so brilliantly, like what sort of hero dances on the hoods of, snakes? And all the young gopis' hearts just totally melted when they saw him doing this. And that's when Krishna acknowledged their deep, deep anurag for him. But still they hadn't actually connected. And then when the connection comes after that, it's called Shankshipta, it's quite brief. It's not very long because there's a lot of shyness involved. So that's a very sweet topic also to understand the meeting that comes after these separations. Then they still have Purva Rag after that because they're still in anticipation of meeting him again. Actually in this Venu Gita, towards the end, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he's saying, because the gopis, they're talking about the cows. And in the commentary, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is saying that actually the gopis, they've already had a meeting with Krishna. They already know what his loving embrace, they've already had that experience. So, but still they are in anticipation of that again. So it's called Purva Rag. What else can it be? It's Vipralamba. And Vipralamba is only divided into these 4 sections. If it's not Man, if it's not Prem Vaichitya, and it's not Pravas, then it's Purva Rag. Correct? Okay, Tita says it's correct. Jai, Srila Gurudev ki jai, Radha Gopinath Ju ki jai, Sachinandana Gaura Hari ki jai, Vaishnavas ki jai, Gopinath Bhavan ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Vancha Kapata Ribhis Chak, Ribhas Indhavim Chak, Paditana Pavani Vaishnavi.